Good afternoon. Happy Tuesday.
Happy
in
Tuesday.
Amsterdam, broadcasting on a wonderful chaos with
Bambos Dimitriou.
and Andy Shalev.
We're with Steven Rudolph, and we're going to discuss. Let's use his title, not the one I did. Feed your tigers before they eat you. And we're going to discuss, and I like this discussion. You know, we've discussed it for years.
Yeah.
What happens when you have a predisposed inkling to move in certain directions in your life and you don't go in those directions, you go in other directions because either societal or parental or education or comfort. And what happens? And that's what we're going to discuss.
And so much more.
When you don't follow your real undercurrent of a dream. And we're doing that
on a wonderful chaos, Mr. Shalev.
Mr. Bambos, we're doing it on a wonderful chaos. Bend your neck again.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us again. This is an exciting show. And, you know, we have a gratitude for Steven before we begin. You're going to remember there was a show we did with Peter Koenig, Love and Business. And we were booked with Steven. And because Peter Koenig had a seminar that was coming up, Steven said, listen, I'll delay my talk with you guys, and then let Peter come on. And that really worked out really beautifully. And I remember how grateful Peter Koenig was, because in a lot of ways, all of us share a certain way of being in the world. And I feel it's a bit of a surrendering to what feels right at that moment, and not wanting to pressure any outcome. Because in general, what I've seen is that when you just surrender to a moment and then you authentically ask what's good for you, it just feels so good. You know, like everyone feels grateful. And I felt really grateful to him, and Peter was grateful to him as well.
Yeah.
So it was worth noting.
Thank you, Steven.
Multiple natures. So Steven is a character who likes to think deeply about predisposition of people and what happens when the patterns that they have aren't put into the right roles and the right positions. And I say that we'll check with him when he comes on. I, as you know, have used the Harrison assessment, which I've also discussed with Steven before.
Yeah.
And the Harrison assessment is, again, a tool, and tools have the function of helping us create kind of a meta level understanding in our brain. And at the same time, they're a little bit dangerous, because a lot of times if we project onto people and we think we understand or know them, then we lose our curiosity.
And connection
to ourselves. So I'm always a little bit, I like using tools, and at the same time, I want to use them lightly, because there's a trap of confidence that I see come into our being. And I'm always really anxious when, because you know why? People want control, and they love tools because it makes them feel like they understand.
Gives them something to hold on to.
It gives them something to hold on to. And we need those little, like, if we're like climbing a ladder, maybe we need that. But if that's what we hold on to for too long, then we don't get to go to the next rung of the ladder, which is letting go of everything you know to rediscover things in your own experience. So that's a bit of the journey that I see, that I coach and I'm on myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think it can serve a purpose to have control.
Yeah.
Because if you're not grounded and you need that control, you could also flip.
True.
So
that's the balancing act, right? The versatility, so being flexible and also being structured.
I think this specific show is going to have so much in it. I mean, a lot of the shows that we've done on truth and everything can kind of tie into this one.
Yeah. And Steven also mentioned that he's halfway through the last letter, so we might even talk to him about that as well.
Let's bring him on.
We're bringing him on. Dr. Steven Rudolph.
Hey, guys. What's up?
Nice.
It's good morning to you, right?
No, it's evening in Cambodia, 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah, it's late night for him. He said he would stay up for us. Thank you.
Of course I will. Of course I would.
So Thank you for coming. How did the intro land for you? Were there things I mentioned that were off, or things you'd like to correct?
No, that was bang on. I would certainly add something to it. I'm not only interested in what happens, what goes wrong when we don't follow who we are, or, what our innate abilities are, but what happens when we get it right. That's even more exciting. I mean, both sides of the coin are interesting, but that's something I do want to talk about too, because that's where really cool things start to happen. Yeah.
Like Steven, if I hear you speak, what was the first question you ever asked yourself, which led you to the work that you're doing today?
Okay, so the first question was, right, I graduated from the University of Florida and moved to New York to find my fame and fortune as a rock star, and I had to get a job to pay the bills. And I got a job as a teacher, teaching English as a second language. And in my first class, I had this epiphany. It was like, oh my God, this is, it was like the voice from the sky says, "You're not a rock star, you're a teacher." And I'm like, holy cow, how come nobody ever told this to me? I went through 22 years or so of education, and nobody ever told that to her. I never found that out. It's like, so that was like that was my first question. Like, why didn't I learn that? And so that was my first inspiration to set off to do something about that. So, yeah.
Wow. Just to go to that moment in time, help me feel into you're teaching because you got to find a way to make money, but you realize that's what you might even call your true calling.
Yeah. I mean, the word vocation, right? It has that word voca. It's what you're called to do, so to speak, right? And so, yeah, it was so weird because I didn't plan any of that. I'm walking down the street in New York one day. I see a sign that says "Wanted English Teachers" up in the some window on 8th Avenue, and if had I been looking the other way, it might maybe it was like "Wanted Travel Agents" or something like that. But that's just what I saw. I took the number down, and I went in. I did an interview, and actually, I didn't get the job at first. It was very funny. I didn't get the job because the woman, she looked at my resume when I came in. I was like 22. It was like about this long, and she's like, "Listen, I'd love to hire you, but you just don't have enough experience." About 3 weeks later, I get this call. She's like, "Yeah, this is Selma from the Center for American Language. Do you remember me?" I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "Well, the guy who we hired instead of you suddenly quit. So, would you fill in for him?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure. When?" She's like, "How about an hour?" So
oh wow!
I hightailed it over there, and I get to the classroom. I dashed up the stairs, and I'm out of breath. And she's like, "Okay, you start in a couple of minutes." And she put the book in my hand, and suddenly I realized I don't know how to teach. I don't know the first damn thing of what I'm supposed to do. And I confessed to her, I'm like, "Listen, what do I do?" And my entire teacher training or my orientation consists of, she put her hand on my back and she leaned over me and she goes, "Just remember, you know more than they do." And she launched me into the classroom. That was it. That was my whole. And
just remember, you know more than they do. I love it.
So I got there and I'm like, I'm shuffling the paper, standing in the front, and all the students are probably thinking, "Yeah, the teacher's here, and he knows what he's doing." And it was like I started to talk and I started to write something, and students smiled and they learned and they said something, and it was like a half hour into it, I started to get this sort of warm and fuzzy feeling, and I was like, I know this. I'd never done it. I had never learned anything, no BEd or anything like that. And it was like, I already know. How do I know this? And then it was like suddenly that voice from the sky came out. It was just like wham! I got hit by a bolt of lightning. So that was kind of my entry.
I think that moment to take this to a little bit, and because I know that moment for me, I was pushed into being the marketing director with no experience and just winged it and figured it out. And I asked, it's not that dissimilar from you, to ask the CEO. He said, "I want a press release one a week." And I looked at him and I said, "I've never written a press release in my life. So how do I, and then he said, "I just want one a week." And I laughingly, and Vambos mentioned this to me the other day, is I said to him, "Do I have permission to fail? Because if I have permission to fail, I can do whatever the hell I want and try and let it, but I need you to know that I might fail. And if that's okay with you, then I'm in." And then he looked at me a bit confused, "Yeah, of course you have permission to fail." And I was I'm getting paid to write to do this thing. Like, this is amazing. So instead of fear guiding it, it was just joy and excitement. Yeah.
Yeah.
And for you, you know, I mean, the photography, you know, like I see the similarity in you when you said, hey, I'm going to be a photographer. And then it was like, what experience do you have? None.
YouTube.
Yeah.
Steven, you said that no one has ever told you that you were a teacher. And if you go back into your childhood and you trace your life back to the age of 22, do you see moments in your life where you were teaching, but very subtly? Can you zoom into those moments?
I think that's interesting. When I was younger, I think it was that I was a little bit more interested in, say, spiritual topics, and I enjoyed engaging in deeper conversations about life. Even I remember I was like in second grade, and my music teacher in school was also my piano teacher, and he came home and he said to my mother, Steven asked some question in class today about something about God. And it was in the music class. I had like no idea. And I was so embarrassed by it. So I remember that I was highly engaged in like things that related to the meaning of life and talking about them with other people. I didn't necessarily see it as me like teaching other people, but exploring things together. That was probably a more more consistent theme or consistent thread. And when I did find out things, I liked to share those with my friends, especially going into high school. And those were things that were related to topics like about life and life awareness. That was, so I did see some of that.
Inquiry. Yeah.
But you know what's interesting, Bambos, about that question? Like, this is one thing that I've seen. These natures are inherent, right? And sometimes what happens is that you can trace them back to early stages in your life. Like, you can see these qualities in people from the time that they're like 2, 3, 4 years old. You might see that someone has an inclination toward music, or someone has an inclination toward art, or somebody has an inclination toward doing adventurous things or sports or etc. But it's not always that it happens that way. Sometimes it takes a certain circumstance or an environment in order for that proclivity to suddenly manifest itself. And one of the best examples I give of this comes from the environment. In the there's a desert in Chile that's called it starts Alpaca or something like that. I'll have to check the name out again. Atacama Desert, that's the name of it. Atacama, Atacama, Atacama Desert. And it's the driest place on earth, right? And there was no rain there for like years and years and years. And just a desert, sand, etc. And then there was suddenly a rainfall in 2015. And the entire desert turned pink, because there were certain like seeds of flowers that were underneath the sand, but there'd been no water there, so they never sprouted. But because that rain came, if you Google it, look for Atacama Desert, Chile, 2015 pink. If you can just remember that, and you'll see the images. It looks like somebody photoshopped it and turned on like the fluorescent pink colors. And so what I'm saying here is that in my situation, the circumstance never arrived that I was put in this position, but because the propensity was already there, boom, it's like the entire desert turned pink. My whole life lit up in just 1 second. So that's the way that I've seen this happen, not just with me, but with many people.
Yeah, I would say, I would agree, if I reflect on my own life, that even going into marketing, I didn't know what the word meant. I actually just felt that there was this creativity and this sort of trying to understand what the customer wants. So there was a psychological, I was interested in demographics. So there was a deep longing for something in it that I wasn't even sure. And then I saw when I got into it, it was really like I was a fish in water. It was just really natural.
Exactly.
And it guided a good portion of my life. Still does, of course. Yeah.
He writes good marketing letters.
Yeah.
So I would bring that back to I call these tigers, right? So one is a linguistic tiger. I also refer to technically, I don't have to get too much into the technical stuff. I can keep it fun. Technically, I would refer to it as linguistic intelligence. It's a term that was coined by Howard Gardner from Harvard University in 1983, he talks about what are called multiple intelligences, which are just different ways of being smart. Linguistic and visual and musical and interpersonal and so on. So I just call them tigers just to make it easy.
And would you say
make it fun.
Would you say that people could have multiple of these tigers, or in general, or is it just one that predominates?
No, so I mean the frameworks that I use, I look at two frameworks. One is Gardner's, and there are 10 there that he calls it 8 or 7 and 7.5 or 8.5. I make it into 10, and I have my own set of qualities, which I call multiple natures. So there's 9 there. So there's 19 that I look at together.
Okay.
And I suppose, you know, when you're looking inside Bambos, you said it right before, and you were also referring to this as well. When we use tools like this, we're going into the mind and we're trying to pin things down and trying to get control on it to say, this is something called like linguistic intelligence, or this is something which is, and it's important for me to, you know, to have that disclaimer. Gardner called them, he called them useful fictions, is what he referred to them as.
Nice.
And so they're useful to an extent, and you have to use them to help get some clarity, but then you dispose of them when you get into doing whatever it is that they have. So they have their purpose to shed light. In this case, the tiger that I'm talking about for you, Andy, would be linguistic intelligence, right? So one of the things I saw from reading the last letter is that when you got to Japan, you immersed yourself in language and you learned Japanese. And when you got to Switzerland, you immersed yourself and you learned German, right? Yeah. So it's not everybody who does that. Like some people would be more inclined to do that than others. And there's another quality which I call entrepreneurial tiger. So that has some of that, you know, that spirit of creating value, or it could be related to business. So if you take those two qualities, linguistic plus entrepreneurial, and you put them together, those are press releases for business and marketing press releases. So if you have a natural inclination toward language and you have a natural inclination toward an entrepreneurial tiger, then you would easily be able to write something like that without ever having done it before. So that's kind of how I build the pieces up.
Yeah.
As I'm hearing you speak, Steven, there's a word which rings in my head, and that's the word a lot of people use: life purpose. And if anyone asks Andy what's the purpose of life, he says life.
But don't ask me. Get over it.
Yeah. But where would these two words connect to what you're sharing? Because I see I see a lot of people who are like so trying to figure out what they want to do in life, and all of a sudden they're just stuck, as opposed to possibly just trying something out.
And I'd like to own something as well, piggybacking off of Bambos right now. When I was running up the stairs to do this, I thought, oh shit, I hope this doesn't become a life purpose show. That was like, and it hasn't, nor is it going in that direction. But
Hey, Steven, I think we should do a life purpose show.
I just wanted to own it, like you haven't found your life's purpose yet. You know, that narrative that makes people feel and wanting. But it hasn't, and nor do I see that. So I just want to acknowledge that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I can put it into context this way. Life purpose is on a different plane. It's different from the things that I'm talking about. The things that I'm talking about right now are your natural tendencies or your natural abilities to be able to do certain things. So your ability to be able to interact with people. Some people are people, and they're really naturally good at that. Some people are more naturalistic. So they're really good with animals or the environment, and they go outside and outdoors and they just bond and connect with nature. So people have different proclivities like that, or some might be more educated, love to teach. It doesn't say, right? There's nothing here when we talk about these qualities, these tigers, that says what you do with them. So purpose for me is on a completely different plane.
Yeah.
In other words, you might have, well, you also might have multiple purposes. You might have a purpose which is to take care of family. You might have a community purpose, which is, you know, to help out, to make some improvements in the community. Or it might be a larger purpose. You might have something that's related to improving the environment or helping literacy or something like that. So there could be multiple purposes. So that's like a completely separate conversation. But what I'm saying is that whatever your purpose is, let's just say that your purpose is you want to take care of your family and you want to really do well in your job in a company that has some good purpose behind it. All right. So your ability to be able to do that depends upon what your natural abilities are. So if you step into a role of a marketing professional, let's just say a marketing manager of a company, if you want to fulfill all of those things, if your natural abilities will enable you to do those activities on a day-to-day basis well, you'll feed right into that. And it's kind of like the channels are all open, everything gets watered, you're watering the root. And so you'll do well at your job, you'll get along better with your colleagues, you'll move very quickly. Like there's I look at it like what I call like a talent.
I would love to interrupt you for a moment on this because I'd like to overlap something as I hear. And what I've noticed, and it also is validated, is that there is a systems view on this world. And when I hear you speak, what I hear is I have an inherent capacity. That inherent capacity meets a position or a role where it can be fulfilled, which creates a positive experience. That positive experience reinforces my feelings of self-worth, of appreciation, and of just general good feeling, which reinforces it into a positive reinforcing loop. So in a weird way, I just see this loop going through it where if I'm connecting to the things that I do well in an environment where they're appreciated, that loop just continues to create and reinforce itself. That's how I could on that level.
Absolutely. And what's interesting about this is also like the brain chemistry that's going on behind this. When you're naturally good at something, like let's say you're naturally good at writing, or Bambos in your case, if you're naturally good at doing photographs. So if you get a job as a photographer, right? And so you start taking some pictures, be like, wow, those are really awesome. And then suddenly you put more time into it, you take some courses, you start doing more work, you want to feel, and you get better at it really quickly. Because when you have a natural ability at something, you move more quickly in terms of how you progress in developing your skills. So the more you do that, then people recognize you. So the brain chemicals, dopamine. So when you're thinking about doing that activity, you get excited about it. So you get dopamine release. Other people come up to you, they pat you on the back, they'll give you you're awesome. Oxytocin gets released. Serotonin gets released when your status starts to go up. So there's this whole brain sort of like positive brain stew that's going on. And then you get addicted to that. You want to keep doing more of that. And so that's that positive, that's actually what's going on internally in the in your brain while that's happening.
Wow. Drugs.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You're
it
a drug
is.
addict. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, Dali famously said, "I am the drug." I love that quote. I am the drug. So all those feel-good chemicals are inside of us. And then the opposite is also there, which is that you don't have a natural proclivity for something. You're trying to be something that you're not. Let's say your entrepreneurial tiger is not that strong, but you have it in that you have to be a business owner and you've got to get out there and build this business. And so you start pushing yourself and it's not working. And people are cursing you and putting you down. And it's one thing that you have the ability, but people don't recognize it. It's another thing that you don't have the ability and and it's not working out. And so you don't get the feel-good chemicals. So what do you do? What do you do?
Go and work in construction.
You do more. You actually give more effort for less return. Usually, is what I've seen. You overcompensate by doing more, but doing it poorly.
Well, my question is this: like, you want to get the feel good. So how do you get the feel goods? Well, you got to cheat.
Oh, listen to a lot of motivational speakers and.
No, but what's your point? Because you're getting to something I don't see yet. So I'm actually very curious on this one. What is it that we're not seeing?
So what you do is you go drink a cup of coffee or 2 cups of coffee, or eat some chocolate, or go for a smoke, or get some stimulants in there, or some retail therapy when you're not feeling good. And so this is what I call stimulants or tranquilizers.
I got
it. You start to pump into your body things that artificially release those chemicals in your body, and that's not sustainable. Like you can't smoke your way to happiness. You can't eat chocolate. Because there's this like diminishing return. You eat 1 piece of chocolate, 2 pieces of chocolate, and after a while you start to get overweight, and you're 1 cigarette, 2 cigarettes, 3, and it starts to go in that direction. So that's the other side of that, Andy, the negative reinforcing loop.
Yeah, I always say to my wife, like, wouldn't life be great if you didn't need to look forward to a vacation, as if what you're living day to day isn't so joyous that you actually need something to, occupy your thinking for a, future opportunity, that kind of thing. Yeah.
You said something just now. Sorry, Andy.
Please.
It's almost like if someone is not living their, what would we call this? If they're not feeding their tiger, in a way, they'll be reaching out for substances which are not very nourishing for the body. And if someone's conscious of that, they can actually, oh, wow, I'm reaching out for this. So where am I not in alignment with myself?
Yeah. And you just hit the right word. You said the word alignment. That's the word that I go to. And yeah. I was in India I mean, I didn't go through my whole story, but if I could make a bridge and then come back to this word alignment, it might be a good place to do it. So when I had that realization in the classroom in New York that, my goodness, this is what I was meant to do, and I got indignant, like, how come no one ever told me this? I had this idea. I was like, I want to make a school where, like, every kid knows who he is or she is. That should be like the curriculum, not like how to pass the exams. And I had a friend from India who said, hey, why don't you come to India and open up a school like that here? It's a longer story, but I'm just keeping it short for sake of time. And I went to Japan first for 3 years to get some I taught English there. I got a master's degree in education from Temple, and then I moved to India in '94, and we built that school. And, well, among other things, in India, it's a place you go for all sorts of realization and learnings about life. And one of my partners there was an Ayurvedic doctor, and that's a whole other branch that we could get into, and another was a Sanskrit scholar. So I learned about this concept called swastha. And the word from Ayurveda, the word swastha is broken up into two parts. The word swa means self, and sta means to be situated in. So swastha means to be situated in yourself. And the cool thing about the word swastha is its literal meaning is health or healthy. And that blew my mind, because what it says is that swastha, when you're situated in yourself, you're healthy. In other words, that health is not like a measurement of your, cholesterol level or your body mass index or, like, your blood pressure or something. Health is how situated you are in, like, who you are. That's what healthy actually means.
Wow.
And that just blew my doors off. And so it was from there that I got onto this. So Bambos, I'm so glad you hit that word alignment, because to me, the word swastha, or healthy, translates very well into alignment. That's, in fact, how I translate it. Although they say healthy, I say alignment. So kudos to you for nailing that word. That's like the heart of what I talk about.
We have another person that was on our show recently who I see very strong overlaps with our discussion, was Chris Akana, and he does something that he calls the alignment quotient. So it's very interesting. And I'm writing the third book now, and it's very much also around aligning within yourself while interacting with another, and how to track that as you're dealing with difficult discussions, for instance. So it's funny how all of us sort of land in a very similar place, and we're doing similar work, of course. Yeah. There's alignment at different levels. I mean, there's alignment in terms of purpose. There's alignment in terms of values. That's a whole another area. Your tigers can be aligned. Your entrepreneurial and your let's say administrative and your logical tigers could be really going, and you're running the books for somebody who's, like, doing illegal stuff, selling drugs or weapons or something like that. So it says nothing about your values. So it's really cool that alignment has multiple layers to it. So it could be purpose, it could be your values. Where I talk about specifically the kind of niche that I focus on is alignment of your natural abilities in terms of what it is that you're doing. You're called to do. I'm hearing,
Yeah.
Bolalong, our friend from South Africa, writes, do these tigers need to be tamed so that one can feed them without fear? Interesting.
Yeah, that's a that's a really good question. When I was in France, I did a workshop, a Feed Your Tigers workshop, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago. It was in the Rhone mountains, really, really beautiful. And there were young people who were there, and maybe 18 to early 20s. And when we did the workshop, they wrote a song called "Craquez le Fouet," which means "crack the whip." And craquez le fouet, craquez le fouet. Something about tigre affamé, like feed these hungry tigers. And so the answer is it's absolutely about, first, I mean, I have like some principles that I talk about. The first is like knowing your tigers. You have to know which ones you have, and some are big and some are small. And taming them ultimately means disciplining them. So discipline comes in the form of the development of skills, right? Mm-hmm. So for instance, if we're talking about like an educational tiger, right? So let's say I have this strong ability to educate naturally. So to develop skills means to learn methods of teaching, and to learn different approaches to teaching, and to learn how to make a syllabus and a lesson plan, and how to support students in their learning process. So all of those are skills. So that's the taming of them. That's the disciplining of them. And it's absolutely necessary that if you want to advance in life, make progress in life, especially with the work that you do, you need to have skills. Ultimately, the value that we bring to the world is in the form of our skills. Because if you just come with raw talent, people say, okay, this is an individual with raw talent, but like, what do you do with that?
Yeah.
And so you need to hone it. And another thing is that you can't be everything. So many people have a number of tigers, and it's sort of like a kid in a candy shop. In fact, I wrote another book years back, about 10 years ago, 11 years ago. It's called Solving the Ice Cream Dilemma. So how do you make a choice for your career when there are like too many choices? Yeah. And so a lot of people, what they do is they job hop. They jump from like one job for some period of time, and then they jump to something else, and then they jump to something else. And so they don't fully, quote unquote, tame them. They're still really wild. And then you get to a certain point where it's like midlife, and it's hard to leverage skills that are not really well developed, or they're focusing on the wrong ones. So my feeling is the earlier you can figure out which strong tigers you have, and the earlier you can start to discipline them and feed them, right, the better off you're going to be, because well, I mean, you'll be able to earn for them. People will find value in them. And if you need to transition from one situation to another, you'll have skills that are portable. And so that's how I look at that.
I was looking at like the first book when I wrote it. I was very anxious and insecure, and I convinced myself I didn't know what I was doing. And I just kept writing and writing and writing. I had a coach and mentor on the side saying, Andy, just keep writing, just keep writing, just keep writing. So I didn't trust myself enough to go through the process because I hadn't gone through it. I didn't understand the editing process. And then I laughed because as it went to the second book, I then had a system in place. It was like, oh, I feel more. And then in the third book, it was like, oh, I'm just writing. And there was kind of this free flow that it didn't even need to know where it was going to go. It just intuitively knew that this is where it had to go. And then at the end, I could structure it in the way that would make it editable. And in a way that, as you said, only came through the practice of doing it and then learning it more as a skill than as a, because I still today don't even call myself a writer, which is kind of funny because it's one of those things you just, one doesn't project onto themselves, the things that they often are because they just do it, right? That kind of feeling. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's another thing about being a communicator, and it happens to come through in writing. I mean, so that's another way about that. But I think the flip side of that is also knowing which of your tigers are not your strongest, and then getting support around those. Yeah. So, support could come in partners, support could come in employers, it could come in the form of, for example, like, having a good editor, or going with a publishing company rather than trying to do it by yourself. If your entrepreneurial tiger is not that strong and you think that you're going to write the book, market the book, promote it, do all that, you got another thing coming. I mean, if you're happy just to write it and get it out there and sell 50 copies to your friends and family, that's okay. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're somehow harboring these dreams of it becoming a blockbuster and a bestseller, then you're going to need to have a team of people. And that's where understanding other people's tigers is important, because you can surround yourself with people who are complementary to you, have complementary abilities. And so that's when you can really rise to higher levels.
Clearly. Yeah. Nice. I also see in my mentoring work, I'll work in group dynamics a lot. And it's really funny because a dysfunctional group doesn't necessarily need a functional person to enter it. They have to enter with a dysfunction that works within the group dysfunction. So it's really a science. It's like an art and a science. You're like, no, just because this person's highly functional, they won't fit in that group because they'll get so fed up with this quickly, they'll leave. So it's almost like, oh, but they have these qualities that make that they'll work within this weird dynamic. So it's interesting because I think it's not as easy as saying, oh, there's a personality type that works. Yeah. It's bespoke.
Yeah, that's it. I like that you've put it that way, because what's happening more and more is this, right? We've got, as Alvin Toffler once called, future shock, right? Not that change is happening, but the speed of change is so fast. We're constantly having to upgrade and to change ourselves. It's really difficult it's almost impossible now to say, you go to school and you get a degree and then you graduate and say, this is the job I do for the rest of my life. Even when you get into companies, you hire somebody for a particular role, and there are companies now that don't have titles for roles because it's almost nonsensical. It's like, okay, what needs to be done and who's the right person who can do that? And so that's where I see that focusing more on tigers and natural abilities is important, because it's like, okay, this is the thing that needs to be done. Of the 5 of us or 10 of us or whatever's the number, who's the most likely person to do this one? That would be me. And who's the most likely to do this one? And the groups or the teams can be cross-functional, and it's sort of like right time at the right place, and you adapt yourself. So it's highly adaptive, and when the world is changing that quickly, the ability for people to adjust to those rapid changes, that's basically survival of the fittest, which is how quickly you can adapt to the situation. And companies are basically like, organisms or entities that need to do that as well.
Ronnie, my wife, continues to remind me, Andy, do realize it's not the strongest ones that survive the longest. It's the ones that adapt the easiest and quickest.
Right. That's it. That's it. And
the point is just, she always likes to point out, she loved the book Sapiens. And I actually didn't read it, but I loved as she shared with me all the quotes from this book. It is an exceptional book. It makes you feel as small and tiny as we are, as a human being that believes we're bigger than we are necessarily. Our egoic selves that believe that we are here and we are the ones that, are the planet, as opposed to just part of a small speck of a bigger picture. So she always tends to remind me that the animals, the cockroaches, will be here long after we are.
Right. And my take on that is that, talking about that negative loop before, when people are misaligned, when they're not in alignment, and they're seeking pleasure and seeking that satisfaction from external sources, that's one of the highest forms of consumption. If you're constantly looking to gratify yourself all day with coffees and chocolate and fast food and purchasing things, that's contributing directly to this consumption problem. And that's actually the problem that we're strapped down with on the planet is we're consuming too much. So I'm not, it's what I feel. I feel that getting people in alignment could be one of the easiest ways. Instead of trying to make like super green technologies and people working hard, spending billions of dollars, it just might be easier to get people a bit more aligned. And then what happens? You love what you're doing and you feel good doing what you're doing. You don't need to like go buy all that stuff and I'm going to try.
I could see
that's my angle.
I can see that visually, like someone that's really in alignment with themselves. They're more in the giving phase. What can I contribute? How can I give more of myself? And someone that isn't, potentially is really looking to undercurrent. Yeah.
Yeah, everything is about
Exactly.
transaction. Yeah.
Exactly. To acquire, to hold and possess, because there's a feeling that when I have stuff and I get stuff, then it makes me more, legitimate, or I exist, or as opposed to I'm enjoying this interaction and I'm enjoying how I'm engaged. And don't, like you said before about not wanting to go on vacation, don't take me away from what it is that I'm doing, because I feel so good while I'm doing it. I feel high.
Yeah.
Don't stop my high.
And as we're talking now, like in my brain, it's like I don't see it as right or wrong in a way of someone that's living like this, because I'm curious what would be this person's place in the world, because they are contributing to some degree to the life cycle. So what it is it that they're doing, even if they're not feeding their tigers?
You're saying that that person also has a place if somebody's not feeding their tigers, and
Well,
what is
I didn't want to insinuate that it's a bad thing if they're not, but what would be the
well,
Yeah,
consequences?
the consequences, if I just, I think you've pointed them out, is that if you're not feeding the tiger, then you go to coping mechanisms. And the coping mechanisms would be consumption, distraction, porn, alcohol, and such.
Okay, so
yes,
it's the
it's
difference.
it's an opportunity to serve. It's an Members, it's an opportunity for others to serve, because if there weren't people like that, then there wouldn't be
Exactly.
there wouldn't be work
We'd be-
there wouldn't be
we'd be
work
out
to
of-
do.
We'd be out of business. You know, I'm always like when I'm working with a client, I usually get pretty close with the families that I'm working with. I'll live with them for a week usually, and then I'll see the dysfunction that goes on in the family, and then they'll always look at me at what moment, because we'll discuss the dynamic, and then I'm like, hey man, I got business in the future. I got business in the future.
I mean, speaking for, like, if I take it to like the Indian perspective, some like the Indian philosophy with how they would describe it is through the process of like birth and rebirth, right? That the purpose of life is this opportunity to purify yourself, or to come to that realization, and that there's sort of like there's unlimited living entities who are constantly taking birth, like since forever, since like the infinite past, and it's going to be going on for the infinite future. And so it just is. That's the way it is. There's not a point where suddenly everybody miraculously comes to some like, whoa, a realization, and the whole world becomes realized and beautiful. But that's like, it doesn't happen like that. It's just like someone gets on the train, someone getting off the train. It's like Grand Central Station.
Yeah, but the funny thing is,
go through it.
Getting to Bambos, to your question though, it's kind of fun because in a way it also comes back to narrative. We all create story, and that story is what we'd use to give our lives meaning. It's used to judge another person's life of they're not living their true purpose or whatever the narrative is. Yeah. And there is a degree to which just the person who does the simplest task, but it's meaningful to them, like that person's life, you wouldn't say that person has less meaningful life than anyone else. In fact, many times those are the people I find far more interesting because they're far more, as you would say, aligned. And I want to be around aligned people, not around people who are disconnected. There's just, I've been writing a lot in the new book around this subject. And I'll say, when I'll speak or spend time with that person, then I'll be interacting with the memories of that person because they're not in the moment with me. They're regurgitating something from the past. So I'm sitting with not the person, I'm sitting with the idea of the person. And now I'm having to like wade through, like, where are you now? Like, show me you. And that just is less interesting for me at this point in my life. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
A film that Bambos always loves when I bring pop culture into our shows. 7 Up, 14 Up, 21 Up, 28 Up. I'm sure you know of these films.
Not sure.
Oh my God, please. It is I think it was BBC did it, and they basically filmed the lives of 7-year-olds, And then they filmed the live 7 years later of the same kids. And then at 21, the same kids, and then 28 and 35 and on and on. And it is one of the most fascinating views of a progressive view, because at 7, you're looking at these kids and you have a very strong idea of what they're going to become. So it's almost like a snapshot where you're projecting on, seeing your own projections, a kid that was raised in a wealthy family, a kid that was raised in a poor family, a child that was raised in an abusive family, and across the spectrum. And what you get to see is a snapshot in 7-year increments of what they turned out to become. And it's scary how predictable it is from 7 to 60, 56, if you do the math, how much you could see in their nature at 7 that makes all the sense in the world as they got older. So it really was, it blew my mind. It really opened my eyes to how we can see a lot more in the nature of individuals at young ages than we might imagine.
Yeah. I haven't seen this also, but amazing.
Yeah, amazing. And of course, these people got well known, and it got very uncomfortable for them in their 30s and in their 40s, because they were well known and people thought that they knew them. So they actually at periods said, I'm not participating in this documentary anymore, because it was too uncomfortable. Because at some point you're like, people recognize you on the street and then they think they understand you because they saw you at 7. So there was but a fascinating snapshot on for me, looking at the traits of individuals and over time. Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is, as you're saying, you can very clearly see qualities in young children, but then the environment around you is also going to impact you. So depending upon what type of parents you have, or siblings, or who your friends are, social situations, geographically where you are, the type of opportunities that are available to you, all of those things are going to create, they're either going to bring those qualities out, or they might suppress them. And so the quality, and so what happens is we get stuck with these programs, and quite often when we're in our late teens or early 20s or so, we have this identity crisis because we've got feelings are running inside of us, but then we have some sort of social things going on outside. There was one woman who you had on one of your programs very recently who was in banking, and then she went to India and came back and said she wanted
Monica Zampa.
Right, Zampa. Yeah, Monica.
Yeah.
So there you go. Like, those qualities were there inside of her, but the parental pressure that was around her was, you've got to be successful financially, and you've got to be in banking or whatever.
Yeah.
That's where she got the praise from. And then you've got to come to grips with that. And not everybody has the strength, like as she had, to be able to stand up against the scrutiny or the disapproval of parents.
Yeah, because that show for the title was My Family Thinks I'm a Loser, I think. And I think, although my brother watches the show now, I don't know if he would have ever called me a loser, but I'm sure that he would have wondered what the hell is going on with Andy for a lot of years. He's lost it. That was the narrative, I believe, in the family. Yeah.
And so I've seen that, there are some people who manage to, quote unquote, dodge the bullet. They manage to, at a fairly young age, to be able to not become hardened by those programs. Let's call them that. But
conditioning.
It's the minority. It's not the majority.
Yeah.
Gallup had a poll some years back about, in terms of work, like what percentage of people either are disengaged with their job or have no feeling toward it whatsoever, and it was like 89%.
Wow.
It was like a really high number. And so it's funny because I've done workshops. I've done many workshops over the years. The average age is somewhere like 44, 45, someplace around there. People who come to the workshops, and it's usually that's the time that their kids are grown up, and now they're starting to reflect. They have enough financial stability in some cases, and they're saying that, whoa, it's a midlife crisis of sorts. That I lost what I had. I had these dreams, or I had these qualities, and I've what do I do now? And there's still hope. There's still ways that you can do things. But of course, the earlier you catch it, the better.
Yeah.
And that's why, I mean, if parents are listening
Then
here,
you've
or
got
folks who are young,
car, you've got mortgage, you've got children's education, you got health care, like all the life's responsibilities get on your back. And that's sort of like this reality that then takes takes fear. It creates a lot of fear. I have a question. Oh, sorry. I was going to segue us into a whole nother area.
Sure.
You said that that you read half of the last letter, and from what you read, you said, actually, I feel like we could probably take this interview in a whole nother direction, but you didn't mention what that was. Have we gone in that direction at all, or is there stuff that you'd say that's curious to you that you'd like to bring in? Because I'd love to hear what that was that came up for you.
Yeah, no, not at all. I mean, because the things that I'm talking about now they're very common talking points, things that I speak about. So it kind of there are layers that are way deeper. When we talk at this level, I find it interesting, and I'm sure that there's some value in it. But there's other stuff that goes on way deeper, and that's why when I read your book, at least the first half, it just touched a chord in me. How you had this idea of sort of like dying in your own body, right? Yes.
Yeah.
That you actually die before you die, and when that happens, that suddenly life becomes open to you, and you lose a lot of the what would you call them? The obligations, or the coulda, woulda, shoulda. Many of these social dictates or pressures are alleviated, and you can live your life. That's what I got from your book.
And I think that, and I didn't want to overstate that, because what I learned was that, and it is very much as you said. There was a moment, it was deep depression. I said, I'm either going to kill myself literally, or I'm going to accept that old version of me is dead, and allow a new version to emerge, not knowing what that looked like yet. And there were far less of the social constraints on that new person. He wasn't as fearful. He wasn't as shameful when it came to women, because I was very anxious when asking a woman out. Like, everyone asked me out because I'd be too anxious that there would be a no or something. It was like, no. And then at some point, I just walk up to every woman I found attractive. I said, "You're really beautiful," without any attachment to an outcome. It was like, wow, this is easy. That happened.
But then you got a beer dumped on your head.
Exactly. Then you realize there's consequences that I wasn't aware of. But I guess the point being, I noticed, I didn't want to overstate it, that there's other things that come up which are also insecurities, but they're different than they were then.
Yeah. So I saw that as being just a fascinating angle, because that was sort of like a parallel thing that ran on for me over my course of time in while I was in India. Chasing something down. The internal process that I went through. The external process was really what I discovered that could be valuable to the world. Getting into Ayurveda, getting into education and philosophy, and then from that extracting out this method that I've extracted, and turning into a company, turning into products, and then it's useful for people now in helping to find balance in their lives. So that's sort of like the surface level, and I find it fascinating. But when I read the book, I sort of felt like, wow, this is you touch a much deeper point. And for me, while I was in India, I was one of the reasons I was there was also to find out some sort of deeper spiritual meaning behind things. That's one of the reasons why we in the West go to India. It's like sort of like the spiritual storehouse. It's like the Amazon.com of like anything spiritual you want, you could find it there. Like there's thousands of gods and different paths and so what I found while I was there, and again without going into too much detail, I was living in India for 21 years, and I poured myself into it, and into even certain spiritual paths to try to find the truth, fasting and chanting and doing all the rites and following to. I didn't want to leave any stone unturned, because the way certain things were described, it's kind of like, boy, if you could reach this level of
Nirvana.
Enlightenment, nirvana, it's just be like, oh, and I didn't want to miss this opportunity. And the people who I was with, I lived with them practically even 12 years of that time. We had the school in our house. We lived together in the same house together about 12 years. I learned to speak Hindi, became completely fluent, and was there for the better part of 21 years. And
you were 21 years in India?
Yeah.
Whew.
Yeah, that was a long time.
Insane. That's a long time. Wow. Okay.
That's I didn't want to leave a stone unturned. I really went.
Yeah, it took you 21 years to do everything.
Well, the first 5 years was just learning to break down my Western frame and be able to see India as like not looking at it through Western eyes. Yeah. And then the next 5 years or so was how I built up an Indian frame so I could see India as an Indian would see India. Yeah. And then the next 10 years was, and I would culture switch. So when I would go back to America, I could switch into like, from New Jersey. So I'd switch into Jersey. First, when I come back, people are like, how come you're speaking with an Indian accent? It would take me a couple of days to get out of, talking a little bit with my tongue toward the back of my mouth when I was speaking, because, that's sort of what happens, language attrition. Yeah. So I would switch back. When I come to India, I would switch into my Indian frame. And it took me like another 10 years to be able to I like how you said in your book, like to become a citizen of the world. Like I didn't have to switch back and forth anymore. Right? I was able to. So
that's beautiful.
So the thing for me that's sort of like that moment that where you talk about when you've experienced the pain of your mom's passing, it didn't happen to me with somebody who was actually physically dying. It happened in terms of the people who I was working with for all of these years, like a brother, like a family member with like a spiritual mission, all that sort of stuff. Finally, one day when push came to shove, and we had a company together, and I had 15% of the shares in the company. When I decided that I wanted to go out to, in the world to sort of explore the rest of the world, and said, I want to find out about how I cash out my 15% or do something to leverage that. My partner said, "What 15%?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "You don't have 15% of the car." I said, "What are you talking? We all signed the paper." That means he, his wife, his brother, and his 3 kids, who were all on the board, all signed it with me some 2 years or 3 years before. And I never kept a copy of the paper because he was the administrator. Everything was in his office. I never thought about it. This is the man I lived with. I held his grandfather's hand when he died. I was there in the room when he passed his last breath. When children a stillborn child was there, I buried that child along the banks of the Yamuna. This is how much closer could you be working 7 days a week, mission oriented? Yeah. And suddenly I was like, all of that spiritual stuff, all of the love and all that stuff, the minute it came to dollars and cents. So what had happened was he never registered my shares for the company. Like he wrote it on a paper and we all signed it, and he never registered it. And he found some cockamamie way of saying that it was going to be taxed and all these things. Then he tried to put it on the religious thing, and ours is a family, and at the end of the day, it was just. So what I learned out of all of that, it's sort of that I was lying on my bed for about a day and a half when this happened. I died. I was that same sort of fetal position because I lost 21 years of partnership of children who came into the world, people who went out of the world, and I thought I was part of this family, and then it was all of my money that I had worked for like 21 years. So I just saw that just like go up in flames, and well, the silver lining out of all of that was that I had managed somehow to get the intellectual property from the multiple natures into a separate company in the US for different reasons. It wasn't like I was trying to take it out. We had to legally do that for a contract that we had. So it's like I walked away with my baby,
Yeah.
which was good. But boy, oh boy, everything just burnt to flames in a minute. Everything that I thought was real, that I thought was true about all that spiritual stuff, I found out it was just a bunch of malarkey.
Wow.
And that freed me. That
From the
freed me up.
searching.
Yeah.
From the searching and the idea, huh?
Yeah.
Well, I
That
would
freed
almost
me.
say, I would say in my own language, is that the illusion of it was, so you saw through the illusion that was for that long, that the only question for me is how much of else is an illusion. If that was an illusion and I took it seriously for 20 years, then what else in my life is an illusion where I sense and believe it's true, but it's not true? Yeah.
Right. So then I started questioning well, what I did was that I like something that Dalai Lama said. He said something like, my relationship with God is my business. And my relationship with everybody else in the world, I'm one person. When it comes to my relationship with everybody else in the world, I'm one of 7 billion people. And what's important is not that religious thing. What's important is how kind I am to others, how compassionate I am to others, how courteous I am to other people. And when I went back retrospectively and I looked at it, what I realized was how many things, I mean, this is nothing new. Different people realize this in different ways. Some people might have realized it like, in their first 10 years of life or something like that. For me, it took us, much, much longer than that. But what I realized was that, religion, when it's used as a way of justifying the means, is a really awful thing.
Yeah.
I mean, so many people have died. Probably the majority of the people who have been killed have been killed due to some sort of religious justification.
Yeah, we've got a lot of people that are watching that have that feeling. So you're singing to the choir on that one. Yeah.
Yeah. So well, all this is just to say, when people talk to me about going to India, about getting some spiritual liberation, I say to them, listen, I've been there. Probably in the best cases, I've seen that like people will wind up going to Varanasi, they get their passports stolen, they get dysentery, and that's pretty much what you really get.
Yeah. I always called it very nasty because it was so hard for me to stomach being in Varanasi. So I always said this place is very nasty.
Yeah, I mean the way you described your trip down the river as well, but that said, I do have to say this. Apart from that, there were fabulous experiences, fabulous people that I've met that I'm still in touch with, and I feel like I was able to extract out of that situation something with multiple natures that the ideas behind this go back 5,000 years. So it's like, it was sort of like a heavy price to pay. I don't know if it's heavy. Maybe in retrospect, it's like a small price to pay for what I was able to actually to bring out of there.
It's funny. I've spent a lot of time. One of the chapters in the new book, what I wrote as I was working with people, I started to say, as I'm working, I'm going to observe what I'm doing and then see if there's things that I'm noticing about myself, because I don't necessarily follow a technique. And one of the things I was noticing, that I was reframing a lot of stuff. So when someone like you would say something to me like, wow, it took me, 19 years and I left with nothing. And then the reframe is that what you just did is to say, wow, actually, if I think about it, this 5,000-year-old content that was drawn and reduced down into something 19 like that, if I think that could have been done in those years and I got away with that, my God, this was nothing. That's really the feeling.
Absolutely. And when I think about it, as I said before, it took 5 years just for me to understand the lay of the land. And it took another 5 years to build up my language level and to get fluent and to understand the philosophy, because it's so deep and you have to weed through all that stuff. And then at that point, that's when I actually figured out multiple natures.
Nice.
I was able to go into the documents, and what was interesting is that they didn't see it. Like, one of my partners he's an Ayurvedic doctor, super famous, knows, but when I went in, I sort of sat there and I'm like, hey, if you do this and you take that and you get this, and this could be used for helping. And so I took these concepts and I put them into a framework that works, and then I got some programmers to program it. And then afterwards, what the software that we make does is, like you were mentioning before about the test, is it identifies which of your tigers, which of your qualities are strong. And then what it does is it can find careers, tasks, hobbies that relate to your nature. And with an algorithm, it'll pair them up to say, based on what your nature is, if you had to pick from any 600 jobs, these would be the top ones for you.
Yeah.
Or even if not jobs, like if you're in a company and you're with HR and they say, like, what are the tasks that this person in sales should be doing? Should they be doing active sales, or should they be doing, purchase? So you can reframe what it is that do they need a little bit more people, or remove the people interaction? Should they be doing more support? Should they be doing more sales? So the software can actually, looking at their profile,
it can match their predisposition to the types of roles and behaviors that are more suitable. Got it. Nice.
Exactly.
By the way, and we're already way over. Over, and we don't mind, but I do want to also ask, like, if someone is interested in doing this test or applying it to their business, how do they go about doing that?
The website is multiplenatures.com. So if you go to multiplenatures.com, you will find a link to email to contact us. Yeah.
I don't think you're a teacher. Like, the moment you open your mouth, private investigator, explorer, investigator.
Yes, an investigator of the human nature. Multiplenatures.com.
Multiplenatures.com. Yeah.
Yeah. And then if someone goes there, can they fill in this actual form? Or like, take me through the process. Yeah. How does someone engage you, and what do they go through? And yeah.
Sure. So you can't do the assessment just by going to the website and taking the test right there. It's mediated by professionals who've been trained in the tool. So it's sort of like, think of multiple nature as something like an MRI, but for your personality. So it's not like you could just go and push an MRI button someplace and take a scan of yourself. You need to work with somebody who's been trained in this. So we have on the website, there's a list of practitioners who've been trained by me. We have about 100 who've been trained. Not everybody's on the site, but if somebody's interested to directly go and to find somebody, you can see their credentials, and then you could contact them, and then they would discuss with you what they can do for you, because each person who comes is going to have a specific need. Somebody's looking, it's a student who's for the first time thinking about a career. It's somebody who's lost their job and they're looking to get a new job. It's somebody who's midlife and they're looking for life balance. It's so it can be lots.
They all have their own, and each of your practitioners obviously has their focus group as well, of course.
Precisely. So we have some people who are career coaches. We have some who are life coaches. We have some who are HR who work just in outplacement, or who work with seniors. So there's all sorts of people who. So you would find somebody who you would like to work with, and then you can contact them and go through the process. And so there's an online test that's about 20 minutes, and then there's 90 minutes that's a face-to-face. So you go through a personal reflective process. So it's not just like you do this test and the computer software tells you what you are. It provides some information, but then there's a live assessment with somebody who's trained in this, who goes through each of the qualities and has a discussion with you. So in the process, you start to self-reflect and figure out where your blind spots are, what you really know about yourself that's true and that's accurate, and maybe discover some things that you didn't know. Yeah. So we've kept a human element to this very purposefully, because we found that, right now, the software alone, even with AI, can only be so good at detecting whether a person is padding, and they're sort of saying that they're a bit stronger in a quality where they're not. So as humans, it's much easier for us to detect in their voice or by certain things that they're saying, or where they might have certain confusion. And so that's why this human part is really important. And so the other people who might be interested are people who work with tools like this. So anybody who is HR, life coach, management, and we've got training programs for that. So in fact, in September, I'm running a training program, September 22nd, for training people how to use the tool. Nice. And we get into Indian philosophy too, so it's we get into the depths of that, but it's focused mainly on the practical use.
And what would just as people that are interested, what would the price be for somebody who would be interested in doing something like this in general? I'm sure each practitioner has a different price strategy, but what could one expect?
It's 1850 euros for the
Okay.
course. It's 7 weeks, and
Oh,
there's a lot
okay.
of super.
But sorry, just to help me understand,
For the test?
does one do the test and then do the course, or can you just do the test?
So if somebody's doing the test with a practitioner, you could expect to pay between 180 euros and 220, someplace in
Okay.
that range, depending. In Switzerland, it's more, and Morocco is less. And we have it in multiple languages. It's in French, Russian, and Lithuanian, where my partner is from, and Latvian.
Nice.
Yeah. And so it's in that range to take the test, and then whatever, usually practitioners, life coaches, etc., they bundle it together with some other services that they're offering.
Yeah,
So
clearly.
it's usually not just done as a test. It's usually somebody comes to find a new direction in life, and they work with them over 3, 5, 7, number of sessions together, and then it's part of that. And so,
and I've seen that often be what people do. They'll find a tool. It usually becomes like a funnel to sell their own services. So yeah, that's a model I've seen used quite often. It's on the screen. And
thank you. That's it. That's right.
www.multiplenatures.com. Thank you for being with us. It was really great to spend time with you.
Thank you, gentlemen, for having me. Love chatting. The time just flew.
Yeah, we thank Gino Yu again from Polytechnic University in Hong Kong for, again, making an introduction. I doubt he's going to watch this far in the video, but we thank you, Gino. I hope you're well and making trouble in Hong Kong. Yeah, we will. We'll talk. I'd like to talk independently to revisit because I love the assessments, and I'm always thinking, how do they integrate into whatever else I'm doing in life? So this will be a fun,
be thrilled to share that with you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye. Sleep well.
Okay.
Bye. Really nice. It felt a lot like the Harrison assessment work that I've talked to you about for this years.
I've also done two of them.
Yeah, you've done it as well, of course. Yeah, how was it for you?
I think there was a lot of golden nuggets in this show.
It felt that way. I like how we also had the segue into not just around the tool, but we went into the other sections as well. The last letter. Yeah. It's so funny when I look down at those books each time. It's weird because I don't ever associate them with myself. Like when you pick them up, there's like always a part of me that feels a little bit uncomfortable.
Good. That's exactly because you don't do it. So I'll do it. Yeah.
Thank you for joining with us. We'll be back tomorrow. I don't know who the guest is tomorrow. Do you know, or
I'm gonna
off the top of your head? So we can introduce them or try to entice people to come with us tomorrow.
Let me open my social media.
Yes.
A wonderful
chaos. Tomorrow we have on,
drum roll, The Ambitious Introvert with Emma Louise.
Emma Louise Parker. Yeah. She's all. I thought it was really going to be fun to have her on because she talks about the polarity of being an introvert and simultaneously being an entrepreneur. And when she said that combination, there was something in me that thought, oh, this is going to make for a great hour. So we're going to talk to Emma Louise Parker tomorrow, and we're going to do that, Bambos, on
Wonderful Chaos.
Can you say it in Cypriot for me?
En a Iberojo house.
On a Iberojo house.